Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Tablas Creek semi-weekly Instagram live broadcast. I am Jason Haas, as always. My guest this week is a winemaker who I have looked up to for a really long time. It's Tegan Passalacqua, who is the winemaker at Turley Wine Cellars, and he has his own winery, Sandlands, as well. He also owns a really cool vineyard up in Lodi. He's one of California's leading advocates for dry farming. And I still think about stuff that I've heard him say at conferences a decade ago. So while we wait for people to join, I will share a few pictures, as I always do, of what's going on at the vineyard. The big news is that it's actually started to get a little bit wet. A picture that I took this morning of the rain coming down. We're a couple of weeks out from a decent, 2-inch rainstorm, and we're already seeing grass growing in the cover crop, which I think is really just beautiful. It leads to this combination that we don't see for very long, where we've still got leaves on the vines. We're starting to get green coming up out of the ground. And we've got cloud cover, which is just beautiful. And this lasts for just a couple of weeks. So it never lasts long. I think my blog this week is going to be some of the pictures that I got, going out today. In the cellar, we are doing a couple of things. We pressed off our last tank. So this is us draining this tank of Tannat that we did an extended maceration on. With Amanda and Craig. I've got a picture of Craig starting the press for the last time. So that's exciting. That's nice to have that done. We can put our equipment away. We are also reblending the wines for our last bottling of the year, which is going to be the Esprit Blanc. And that's coming up week after next. So we're taking all of the different foudres and little mini oval foudres and barrels and puncheons that this has been aging in, put it back together, and we'll then get it into bottle. And I'm super excited to have it. It's going to be delicious. Okay, what else do I have? Any more pictures? We've got the tasting room and the cellar are decked out in its holiday garb, and we're doing specials on things like magnums, and we have holiday packs with $10 shipping, all that kind of stuff. If you're interested in any of that stuff, check it out on our website. And our deadline for pre-Christmas delivery is the 15th of December. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. I am going to invite Tegan to join. Sent it through. Hopefully Tegan sees this, and this is all as straightforward as it's supposed to be. But I'm going to ask him a whole bunch of stuff. If you have questions, as always, if you have questions that you would like me to ask him or would like us to talk about, please add them into the chat, and we'll make sure that we get to them. Okay, I don't see. I sent through a request, but it did not happen. So Tegan, if you are watching this and you want to send through a request to me, that's the other way that it's doing. Okay, I just saw that. I am going to accept, and hopefully that works this time. Sometimes this is okay. Send a request. I'm accepting the request. And we will. There we go.
Hey there.
Excellent. Hey, Tegan.
How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good. I'm gonna move my little phone here now that. See it. There we go.
Awesome. Cool.
How's it going?
It's going great. As you probably saw, we pressed off our last tank today. Feel like harvest is now finally done. How about you?
We actually start bottling tomorrow. So in St. Helena, we're bottling the white coat tomorrow. So we still have tanks to barrel down, and we're starting. We actually delayed bottling about 2.5 weeks at Turley because we didn't have the tank space to bottle. So but no heat spikes and no fires, so we'll take just a little longer harvest.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that we realized we had to do was like, we better check with our interns and make sure that they can stay through Thanksgiving.
For
Like
sure.
things that we haven't had to worry about in recent years.
Yeah, no, I think it really is. There was just a more calm, it was busy the whole harvest, but it was just a calmer pace to harvest where you could make, more thoughtful decisions, which is a real refreshing change, over, COVID and fires and heat spikes. And then the quality seems exceptional. So all good.
Awesome. Well, I do want to ask you about that, but let me start at the beginning. So
Okay.
How did you get into wine? Was wine on your family table growing up,
No,
or did you come to it on your own?
We had family friends who were in, like, basically, I feel like a quarter of my good friends, their family worked for Mondavi at one time or another. And then other friends, kind of worked auxiliary, parents worked on bottling, and growing up in Napa, it really is like the industry, it's like growing up in Pittsburgh, and it's like, oh, they work at, the steel mill. It's like, yeah, it's what people do. So it wasn't really a thought at all. And I went away to college and I studied public health, and I moved home and was in the process of becoming a social worker, and a friend who kind of had a staffing agency said, hey, this winery's looking for a lab tech, and we just can't find anyone that has organic chemistry. You have a year of organic chemistry. Do you want to take this job? And I thought, oh, that sounds fun. So that was in 2001. And I worked in that lab for a little over 6 months. And then I took a job at Napa Wine Company back in its heyday. And I worked in the lab there. And that was just an amazing experience. At the time, Colgan, Bryant family, Paulmeyer, Larkmead, Helen Turley was making a bunch of wines there. And it was, it really was, every consultant was there in the lab every day. And it was the best education that I could have ever expected. And I started supplementing that with some classes at the Napa Valley College, the junior college. And I really, after the first semester, just gravitated towards the viticulture side over the enology side. And I ended up taking every class there. And after my bachelor's, I got an associate's degree there at Napa College, which I can't really promote enough, that, what that has done for the Napa and Sonoma wine industry, because it's really helped train people that normally wouldn't be able to go to a Fresno or a Davis or a Cal Poly, and just, it's added some skills and some know-how to, people that are really doing the work in the industry, the ones, as you showed the pictures, like a lot of people don't know, but like there are other people who are actually physically doing a lot of the work that, no one ever sees. So I think, supporting those people and helping them grow and learn is, a big part of what we all should strive to do.
Yeah, for sure. So how did you get connected to Turley? How did that happen?
I went and worked, I saw a good friend, Andy Smith, who makes the Dumal wines and is an owner there. He helped me get a job in New Zealand for a young guy named Doug Weiser, who was the first assistant winemaker at Literati, and his ex-fiance had worked at Turley. And I had written a letter to Aaron, and before, they didn't have an email address, so I had to fax it. And, Aaron offered me a 10-week internship, and that was in 2003 in March. Or February 2003. So, a 10-week internship. July was 20 years at Turley. So, I know you have some longer, tenured staff, which it's a sense of pride for me. Like Turley's actually has, a lot of guys in Paso who have been there, over 20 years, and it's really neat.
Super cool. And so it seems like you got into wine from the kind of production side of things, rather than like falling in love with wine as a beverage first and then trying to find your way into the business. Is that accurate?
I think that's true. I think, again, I grew up in a pretty blue collar household. That there was a lot of, curiosity. My dad drove a cement truck, but he restored old Victorian homes on the weekends, and he worked with one of his mentors. They did a lot of repairing stained glass throughout. Napa Valley, like Spring Mountain's famous stained glass. Like my dad worked with his mentor on nights and weekends, so there was always that, curiosity and, but, it just wasn't something that was on the table. It was something that was still, and a lot of my friends that are still Napa natives that I grew up with, they really have a problem with what kind of Napa's become, where they're like, I can't go get a hamburger for under $23 or, and a beer's, $9. And they don't participate in kind of the food and wine part of life that we do. And so it just seems kind of obnoxious, the pricing of things, which, I do, you guys, with your box wine, I remember years ago, someone was like asking, like, how do we get more young people to drink, wine and like rosé? And someone posted a photo of like a wine list. And this is, again, maybe 10 years ago. And they're like, not with $17 glasses of rosé. You know what I mean? That's not going to encourage. So I think what you guys have done with your box wine is one of those things that, makes it more comfortable for people that are, a bit apprehensive of showing that their lack of understanding or knowledge of wine.
Yeah, I mean, I think wine needs entry points. So I spent a lot of time thinking about that, like how us as a brand, us as a region, us as an industry, a community, like what are the entry points? How do people who aren't already a part of this become a part of this?
Well, and I do, I graduated college right around the time that Two Buck Chuck hit its, heyday. Right. And a lot of my friends who kind of paired up right in college and had college sweethearts and had homes and got married, I remember them reaching out to me, because they were buying cases at Trader Joe's, and then they were drinking wine most nights, which wasn't something that was the norm, but it was their way of showing like, we're adults now, I mean, we have the live, laugh, love, sign in our kitchen and we're drinking wine. And then a lot of them would be like, I want something like better. I want to go, to my in-laws for dinner. And, so a lot of friends, even as, even when you don't know a lot about wine, you have friends who basically think you're the wine expert even before you're, the wine expert, you're kind of that person.
Cool. I was thinking back. I think the first time that we met, and I may be misremembering, the first time that I can remember was when you came down here for the Roussan Symposium that we hosted back in like 2008, I think it was.
Okay.
And at that point, like you were running the vineyard side of things for Turley. What brought you from like the vineyard side of things to the winemaking side of things?
Well, I think, the way Turley is not as, back then we didn't have a website. I mean, I back then was responsible kind of for all what you would consider the winery, the enology as well. Okay. But, that was just kind of the way, Aaron, who had hired me, he just used, he is the best person I've ever met about getting every single, he would be a great, wine press. He can squeeze every last drop out of, anyone who works for him. He creates a really competitive, environment. And, he just really like, he would just tell me what to do if it wanted me to go supervise the bottling or run the vineyards. And, I left in 2005. I tried to quit Turley in 2005. And, my role then was just, wasn't defined. It was just do whatever Aaron tells me to do. And I went and worked for the Graillot family in France. And I thought like I wasn't coming back. And like the day before I left, Aaron's like, hey, like, when are you coming back? And I'm like, I wasn't planning to, it's like no time to really think. He's like, well, what if I gave you all my like viticultural responsibilities? Like, would that be something you'd come back for? And I was like, sure. So when I came back, I thought I was being proper and I made up this job description. I typed out what I would do and I asked for this meeting. I sat down and gave it to him and he kind of looked at it and put it, he's like, your job's to make the wines better. And that's like all he ever told me. And he's like, I'm not going to like tell you what to do. Like your job's to make the wines better. And so I started, going to every vineyard every week, and working with growers and, working with the wines in the cellar and kind of trying to set, better protocols for, stuck fermentation and just kind of a little bit, of everything. So that was kind of the way Turley works. You know what I mean? It's like those are kind of your directives, and that I, for some reason, really could throw myself into that. I've never really liked being like, told what to do or put into, boxes. And, I'm definitely at this point, I'm unemployable. You know what I mean? I feel like, and I worked, like 70 hours a week for, the first like 12 years I came back, just with no one telling me what to do. It became like kind of an affliction,
So as this is all happening, you also started your own brand.
Sure. And that's the thing, Larry is just a really amazing enabler. You kind of look at Larry do things, you're like, I want that. It's like the one thing, I've never really wanted to fly a plane, but like everyone else who worked for him, like wanted to fly a plane. I never wanted to be an ER doctor, but just there's something, it's like, if you want to do something, do it. You know what I mean? Like that's just Larry's kind of motto. And, just looking at things and, I think it is this, it's a young, like, and I hate to say like male thing where you like really need to show people that you can do something. Do you know what I mean? It's ego, like trying to express itself. And it's like, I want to show people that I can do it. I don't know if it's an immature thing but that was something that was really strong inside of me. Like I have a voice too. Like I am singing in Larry's choir and Aaron's the director, but like I personally, like I want to sing, and so the other thing was I started meeting, I basically stopped at every like old vineyard and not old vineyard in California and just chatted people up. And there were always people say, hey, I'll give you some, Carignan. And I'm like, no, we're okay. Like, we're not looking for some. And, basically it started dawning on me that there were all these opportunities that weren't Zinfandel, that I had relationships either with them or their neighbors. And I was helping them sell fruit to some of my friends. And I'm like, why am I not, like, I want to make, wines too. And so that's kind of how it happened. I think if I really said, the first Sandlands wine I made in 2009, but in 2008, a friend of mine offered me and Turley like the Cinsault that we make from the Bechtel vineyard. And I picked it at like 22 bricks in 2008, and everyone at Turley just mocked me and made fun of me. It was just unheard of in 2008 to be picking at like 21.8 or 20, and everyone made fun of it. And then the next year, people at Turley drank more of that than like any other wine, and it was, I wanted to, again, Aaron, again, really enabled me. He's like, well, what do you want to do? And I'm like, well, I went to Griot to learn whole cluster fermentation. I want to do whole cluster. And this Kermit Lynch producer, Domaine Dopiak, he makes an old vine Cinsault that's all whole cluster that Alain Griot introduced me to. And I'm like, that's the way I want to do it. So the first Cinsault was all whole cluster, picked it around 22, and then aged in all used French oak barrels. And, it was kind of a controversial wine for Turley for the first like 4 or 5 years, because people didn't know what to make of it. Some of our long-term customers were like, well, this is a cheap Turley. We were selling it for 17 retail a bottle. And, it just, but it also really opened people's eyes to what we do kind of internationally. And, we sold a lot of it in New York and San Francisco and LA and Chicago. And those people really said, wow, like this isn't a Turley wine. And we're like, it's organically farmed, it's dry farmed, it's old vines, and it's made with basically just adding sulfur. Like that's what we do with everything. We just pick the Zinfandel a little bit riper.
Right. How did you come up with the name for Sandlands?
So that's it. So actually it's a name that one of the friends that I got fruit for actually back in 2004 was Abe Schoner of Scolium Project. And we bonded over Old Ridge wines. That's when we met. We bonded over like Old Ridge at a party in Napa. And I was always going out to Contra Costa, and we talked about Evangelo and Pato. And Abe always said, like, I got him grapes in 2004. And then he would go out with me on my trips, like on a regular basis. And he would always say, like, let's go out to the Sandlands, And so he actually, one of the wines he made, he actually labeled Sandlands before I did. But that was kind of like our name for, if you've ever been to Contra Costa, it's like,
Yeah.
that's what it is, and that was just kind of, our little thing. He'd text me, he's like, when are you going out to the Sandland? He wouldn't say Contra Costa, it was Sandland. So I had it was the name that I'd always wanted to, but I'm like, he bottled a wine, but they were grapes that I got him. And one day we were having lunch. I'm like, what do you think about me using that name? He's like, oh, of course, go for it. And I'm like, that's what I wanted to use. I just kind of wasn't sure. So, and I've taken it to like a different meaning, because a lot of the vineyards I work with are, own rooted. And like the whole reason I can work with those vineyards is because of the soil that they're planted in. A lot of people, like to say, oh, these vineyards they've taken care to keep Fluxer out. That's not,
right.
The soil's working for us, more than we're working for the soil.
Right. That's just so that people who are watching might not know. I mean, phylloxera can't get established if the sand content of the soil is high.
Right. And, that's it. But that's an interesting thing, like the foothills has, resisted phylloxera from quite some time, but phylloxera is taking down, 130, 150-year-old vineyards up in Amador County, like as we speak. And it's so, all this kind of, as there are other rootstocks that are failing.
Right.
We've seen 101-14, and then there's this sudden vine collapse and I always say, like, the rootstock conversation, it's only 150 years old. Do you know what I mean? If you look at the cultivation of grapevines, we have this small little snapshot where we're like, yeah, this grafting and rootstock, this all works. And then slowly over time, with enough time, you start to see some things like Syrah's a perfect example, and like, some of the grafting compatibilities that we see. So I think, staying curious, always learning, like not think that anything's, we figured it all out.
Yeah, for sure. I'm struck by a comment that Neil often makes here, which is like, I get one shot to do this each year. Like,
right.
If I've been doing this for 40 years, which sounds like a really long time, but that's only 40 shots at
right.
doing this.
Well, and that's the thing, also like, picking grapes, like, you can't put them back on the vine once you get them, in the tank. And, but as I've matured, again, that ego part of it, and it's a story. I want to tell a story because I love telling the story, where an ex-girlfriend of mine worked for Nils Vengi at Saddleback back in the day. And another friend, sommelier, who now has a winery up in Oregon, worked for another winery. They were both making To Kalon Cabernet in 2006. And I tell this story a lot because I love it. And the Nils picked To Kalon in 2006 at 23 bricks, which was like the lowest of the low, right? And this friend was working for this consultant. They picked To Kalon at 32 bricks. And both things were kind of like, they just stayed in my head as weird things do. And like 4 years later, I was at the dentist and I was reading the Wine Spectator, and they rated both of the wines. And the 23 brick wine got 95 points and the 32 brick got 99 points. And what it taught me is, with great vineyards, you have a 9 brick differential to make great wine. And like, everyone thinks that's like a joke, and everyone wants to say, no, like, it can't be picked on Tuesday, it has to be picked on Wednesday. And that doesn't determine quality at all. It taps you on the back and say you did a great job, and like, you did it perfectly, but it's not a qualitative, it's a psychological thing. As my friend Adi Badenhorst says, it's psychological rightness, not physiological rightness. That's what, like, and we're just so focused on it. And, that's where I think like style comes in. It's like, do you want to pick at 27 or do you want to pick at 23? But either way, you can make great wine.
Yep. Cool. That's a great story. So at what point in this, you have your own vineyard also that you bought in Lodi?
Yeah. So I have my own Zin vineyard that was planted in 1915. I lease a Zin vineyard, and then I lease another vineyard in Contra Costa that I started Sandlands with. And then I've been developing the last couple of years a vineyard up in the foothills at about 2,800 feet that I've been planting Eshela, tight space, dry farm. So that's that's the big experiment that I'm embarking on now. As you know, dry farming doesn't always go exactly how it's planned when you're establishing a vineyard.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I remember a panel that you were on. I was in the audience for at the Ferry Plaza building back in 2014. About it was on dry farming,
Okay.
and you made a comment I still think about, which is that essentially every root that you put into every vine you put into the soil, that's a wick,
right,
that's pulling moisture out.
Right.
Really, what you're thinking about as you're planting a dry farm vineyard or you're evaluating a dry farm vineyard is like is the number of wicks in balance with the amount of rain and the water holding capacity of the soil.
For sure.
And like you've worked with all of these vineyards that have been in the ground for a really long time, and you work with all of these old vineyards, and now you're having the chance to plant your own dry farm vineyard from scratch. What are you doing things the way that they would have been done 100 years ago, or are you doing things differently?
Well, the easy answer is that depends. So I replanted an acre of sandso out in Lodi in my vineyard, the Kirschenmann vineyard, and it's been dry farmed the last 2 years. I used old drip to water the rootstock the first year, but then we've harvested the last 2 years, it has seen zero water.
Uh-huh.
And I used 140R, the rootstock that's kind of prevalent, like not really in Etna in Sicily. Some people use it on Etna, but a lot of the areas like where Ariana Ochapinti is, a lot of them use 140R. It's a rapacious rootstock that, I think Paulson developed it as well. And it is amazing, so that vineyard is 10 by 8 spacing, dry farmed. The vineyard that I'm doing up in outside of Volcano is 3.5 by 7 dry farmed. But the big difference is where I'm at in Volcano, we get on average 45 inches of rain. Right. So back to the wick question, I'm actually thinking, one of the ways to deal with that is to, plant more vines, and kind of see how they evolve in the soil, without water. My guess is there'll be smaller vines than, of course, there'll be smaller vines than when we plant 10 by 10 head train, but the root system, what I said is true. They are wicks, but, a large root system, the straws are bigger, right? So, if you have a 10 by 10 vineyard where the roots kind of can exploit a 5 foot by 5 foot parcel of the soil before they hit the next vine, those are, it's a bigger root system.
That makes a ton of sense. And I think I always look at vineyards that are developed around here, people planting 3,000 vines an acre, 4,000 vines an acre, as though they were in Burgundy where the problem is too much water.
Right.
It drives me crazy seeing that and thinking you're essentially making these vines dependent upon what you give them every week for the rest of their lives.
Well, and that, that brings up, there's a good friend in South Africa, makes some amazing wines, and he's a big, crimper person, and, we had this, amazing debate over dinner, heated debate about, I just said, just tell me, do you think watering your vines every week is sustainable? Do you think that the rest of the world's lifetime, we're going to have fresh, clean water that we can, just throw out on grapevines? I'm like, just answer, do you think that's a sustainable practice? And he wanted to answer it, you know what I mean? Because, so yeah, I think, I always say also, my friends who work in Burgundy in the summer, what they do all summer is they hedge vines, because they keep growing, it rains in the summer. And, clearly I think there are a lot of different ways to do it. I truly believe one of Paso Robles' greatest assets is the thing that probably makes it the most vulnerable is the lack of water. It's hard for people to, overproduce, and so the quality stays at a level that, even if people are trying to, there's only so much water for them to water their vines that they're not getting 8, 9, 10 tons to the acre. So the base quality is at a very high level, I think, because, it's almost like there is a, AOC regulation on, water usage because of just the lack of it, which I think has really helped out, for the wines of Paso.
Huh, that's interesting. I never thought about it in that way. But I mean, I know for sure, like, even if we give water, like, I mean, about whatever, 60% of our vineyard is irrigatable, even though we
Right.
don't very much. But it's not like when we give it water, it's producing,
Right.
even
Right.
then, it's delimited by other factors.
Right.
So I'm curious, does your, and I'm not one to talk, I have a degree in archaeology, but
Yeah.
do you feel like your degree in public health influences the way that you think about farming or the wine business?
Well, I mean, if I were really following, the program director, we had a book, it was a clinical alcohol and drugs class. And he always said, take a Sharpie and cross out the alcohol part, because that is a drug too. Like, it's like, he was like saying they're trying to, like, in American culture, we've tried to, so from a public health standpoint, he wasn't a fan of any, even wine. He said, you want wine, drink cranberry juice. You want the effects of red wine, drink cranberry juice. And I think, it was such an interesting degree that just kind of studied, a lot of, like, human behavior. And I think that has really helped me, understand people and, like, health and, decision making and, but again, I still feel guilty for things I told growers to do when I was 25, dropping fruit when I thought it was necessary, and, spending money to remove just things that, like, growers, these weren't Napa cab growers selling fruit for, $20,000 a ton. So, I mean, I do think you start to kind of, when you don't know, you kind of can be more strict. The more you, master anything, the more kind of freedom you have to move. And, yeah, so, but it, Larry and, has been a huge influence. Turley, the state where Turley is in St. Helena, that's the first certified organic vineyard in Napa. When Larry had 2 acres for Frog's Leap, and he was, his dad was an organic cotton and, tobacco farmer. So he just was like, we're not going to spray, and I believe Frog's Leap was also the first folks in California to give bonuses for organic farming. And it's still in our contract today. Any person who gets, organic certification, we give an extra 10% to the agreed upon contract. And that was to help offset where everyone says, oh, well, you have to fill out these papers and you have to do an inspection. It's like the 10% more than pays for, all the hassle.
Yep. Yeah, we're in that same process because we made the decision a couple of years ago that we were going to, within 5 years, move to sourcing all of our Patalan vineyards entirely from organically farmed sources.
Right.
So we've been doing the same things. We've been doing, like, offering education, but also offering an incentive in terms of the price that we'll pay for the grapes, for the to give the growers the reassurance that it's not like it's going to reflect negatively on their bottom line by making this choice.
Well, and to me, the biggest thing early on, there were growers that Larry didn't want. Like, Larry had a more hard line than I did. I'm like, wow, this vineyard's amazing. And this grower seems receptive. They're scared, they've never, but then, like, you talk to a grower and they said, well, my grandpa used to do it that way. So that, that's the beauty of working with old farmers and even people kind of our age or older. It's like, they were around, multi-generational vineyards. They were around enough to kind of remember that there was a time, before modern chemical farming. And so that was like a lot of, some of the first people I helped convert to organics, again, they were afraid, because someone who was, their PCA was telling them, if you don't spray this, you're going to, get blight and everything's going to, and, people who really have, and that's the big difference. There's, a lot of the production farmers throughout California, these are people who, it's not their livelihood. You're putting in 350 acres of Chardonnay, this, it's a land investment and people parking money somewhere, that's the big issue, dealing with people who really are worried about their livelihood, and there's fear of, like, this is how they pay for their kids' college and a new car and, braces, is if the farm makes money. It's a big difference in the people who are like, oh yeah, we have 600 acres of grapes, and yeah, we lost 500,000 last year, but it's okay because our other businesses made money. And and Napa has that same problem too, in a different scale, where it's small production, but a lot of the small producers in Napa are now competing with people who don't need to make a profit. They're not in it. And that's the beauty of Turley. Like, everyone who's always worked there, like, we all pay our bills on the success if, like, Turley makes a profit or not. And to me, that I've learned, that's the first rule of sustainability. If you can't pay your workers and if you can't pay your vendors, doesn't matter how cute you are out in the vineyard, with your bee suits. And I love all that stuff, but, like, that's great. But if you're not paying your vendors and you're not making a nickel or two, like, you're not sustainable.
Yep, for sure. Okay, I have like 5 more questions I wanted to ask. I also I try to keep these to half an hour.
Okay.
We're already a little half an hour, so I'm going to ask you one more real question.
Yes.
That is to talk a little bit about the work that the Historic Vineyard Society does.
Okay.
I think it's just one of the coolest things going on in the world of California wine.
Yeah, it's really fun. It started, it's kind of, creating something out of, loss, where, Mike Officer lost a couple vineyards in Russian River Valley that were, these beautiful old vine vineyards that were, truly like repositories of DNA that evolved in California for 120 years, that varieties that, Europe doesn't even have examples of. And then Turley lost, a good chunk of the Hain Petit Syrah vineyard. It all kind of happened. And there's a wine enthusiast on the chapboard Wine Berserkers named Mike Dildine. And he was this, I don't know if you know him, but he's this kind of rebel rouser. And he was like, we got to do something, and we all so we started having meetings. And then that was 2010. And basically every year we've had a number of events, educational events. One of them will be, and the biggest thing is, people would always throw around like, Lodi has the most acreage, and, Dry Creek Valley has the most old vine of this, but no one really knew. These were just kind of like things that people said, pulled out and said, yeah, no, we do. And so it's like, well, why don't we start putting together a list of vineyards and sizes, contacting growers, figuring out like actually what's in the vineyard. And then that also started a side project with UC Davis, where they started giving us a discount to send in things for DNA testing. And we really started finding out that, and one of the things we knew, that a lot of these old vineyards weren't primarily just one variety. They were field blends. And, we still have a bunch that have come back unknown from the whole DNA of the world. And, so the 2 events we usually do, we do a tasting. And of course, since COVID, that kind of backed off. We did a big tasting in San Francisco. And then we always did like one intensive. So we'd either pick a region like Russian River Valley, and we'd visit 4 vineyards, and we get tours and walk the vines. And then we'd have a big dinner, and, we'd share wines from the vineyard, either historically or wines that were current. And then we also did, which were really fun, were these intensives. The first one was Pagani Ranch, where David Gates from Ridge was in a backhoe pit showing the soil. Mike Officer was out in the vineyard doing ampelography, showing all the different varieties. And then Bob Bialy taught everyone about like head-trained viticulture and, cultural practices. And then there were so many people that had made Pagani over the years. Everyone brought wines from, old vintages. And it's just this real... And it's not even old vineyards. Like, you go and walk a vineyard and you really get a feel for a place, that you can have the wine and you can drive by it, but you go out in a vineyard, and huff and puff up a hill or something, and you're like, wow, this place is special. And I think, anything examined more closely is beautiful, right? I mean, just the more you take time to examine something, and, everyone who came on these tours, they were just like, I can't believe it. They're kind of like, it's like walking through a museum, is what they really are. So it's been a real fun part, something to be part of. And basically it's to teach the consumers that these are treasures, they're viticultural treasures that, are being, threatened and torn out. I mean, out in Lodi, it was a bad year for Zinfandel, and driving up and down, I'm like, old vine vineyard torn out, old vine, just a lot, just this year, more and more old vines are being torn out because they don't fit the modern, production of machine harvesting and 8 to 10 tons to the acre.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember talking to Morgan Twain Peterson about some of the crazy diversity that he'd found.
Oh, it's amazing.
Is ampelography, because when we imported and propagated and planted and eventually made the first Vacarez made in California in about ever. Right. And I was talking with Morgan. He's like, "Oh, we found a DNA match. We have one Vacarez vine at the Bedrock Vineyard." Just the idea that there's all of this incredible diversity, including things that presumably went extinct in Europe during phylloxera, here in these old California vineyards is like, I think it's really fascinating.
And they stayed a lot, and it's one of my thoughts. It's like, it's like kind of like a seed repository. Like, these are things that have actually done well in the California climate. We haven't examined them closely, that, they may have been written off, and, again, rootstocks is probably the biggest part of the conversation. Like, you look at all the old viticultural work done on all these varieties, it was all own rooted. It's just a game changer. Like, if you really want to see how a variety will do in a given space, it own rooted and dry farmed. That's the way, that's the truth in life, where it's like, you can put, Pinot Noir on 140R and dry farm it, in Fresno, and everyone goes, wow, it did really well. It held its acidity. It did, and it's like, but the variety itself doesn't really want to be there, and so I think, rootstocks has allowed us to make more viticultural mistakes, than we'd want to, but it's also, again, varieties, like you said, that have been around for 130 years in the California climate and are still alive. There might be something to it in the, I have the, research station books, and literally they talk about Monastrell, and they talk about it next to Mataro, and they compare the two, and they just say that Mataro is not really suited to the Passalacqua climate, but like 130 years before this mistake happened, like, it's in the University of California research station, like, they observed that, you know what I mean? And now everyone's like, wow, this Graciano does really, really well in Paso. And it's like, yeah, like 130 years ago, they figured that out. And, it's just kind of one of those interesting, they were comparing color and acidity, and just, they're like, at the end of the season, the Mataro really, the leaves get dried and it slows down in ripening. And, it's just all these things that, a lot of these things have already been, examined.
Yep. Okay. If you have time for one question, Amen. Madeline Paquette asked if you'd ever gone and mapped the Jackson Station vineyard.
So unfortunately, there's only one. I was able to get access with Daryl Cordy, Mike Dunn, and Axel Borg a couple of years ago from the family that owns it now. There's only one vine left. So most of the Jackson Research Station is gone. But, there is this amazing, I'll put it, maybe I'll send it to you. There's this amazing letter that was written by this woman, Sue French, that worked at Robert Mondavi when she was trying to figure out where Sauvignon Blanc that Mondavi had came from. And it's a letter from Austin Goheen, who was the plant pathologist who rediscovered the Jackson Research Station, really dedicated his life to bringing clean plant material back to California. He's also the person who discovered that Zinfandel and Primitivo were the same thing. And he wasn't a viticulturist, and he wasn't an ampelographer, and he wasn't a winemaker. But he was in Puglia for a virus deal, and they had dinner one night. He goes, if I were in California, I'd say this wine tasted like Zinfandel. And the guy goes, no, that's Primitivo. And he goes, it really they left the dinner, went out with flashlights to the vineyard it came from. And he goes, that looks like Zinfandel to me. And so they took, cuttings back to UC Davis, and the first year it grew up, it was like, wow, that's the exact same thing. And he's also the one who really like saved, really did his work, after World War II to really try to reintroduce, clean material into California, just because everything was virus. And the story of the Jackson Research Station is he found it and everything there was own rooted and there was no virus, so it was basically this kind of lost ark of, viticultural history that didn't have virus, when UC Davis, all their nurseries and all the nurseries in California had virus. So really neat guy. And he added a lot to the, it doesn't get enough credit for kind of what he did. And again, it's all curiosity and not, thinking he knew everything.
Awesome. Well, Tegan, thank you so much
Thanks for having me.
to share these stories. They're great. I love the comments that people are, I don't know if you saw them scrolling through as we're talking, but people are really digging it. So,
Ron, I just want to say I'm really impressed what you and your family have done, not just for Paso, but for the world of wine. I think what you're doing and continue to do with educational things, but everything you guys have done, it's, I feel like I'm such a Ridge fanatic, and I feel like you guys kind of took a baton from Ridge and everything they've done for California wine and brought it into the 22nd century. So thank you for all that you guys do.
Thanks, Tegan.
Yep.
For people who want to learn more about what you do with Sandlands or Turley or the Historic Vineyard Society, what's the best way for people to do all that?
I mean, all of them have websites. The Sandlands website's the least informative. And Turley, we do have a modern Turley website. We have a Historic Vineyard Society website. We do have an event most likely coming up this spring in San Francisco that will be a tasting that's basically welcome to all people who make wines from old vine vineyards. It's a really amazing tasting. It's cheap. If you want to come spend a day in San Francisco and taste old vine wines from all throughout the state, please join us.
Awesome. Cool. Well, Tegan Passalacqua, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure. Good luck
Thanks
with
for having me.
Bottling and the last couple of tanks you got to dig out. And
we're all dug out. We just have to barrel down. We need barrels now. So.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Cool.
Okay. Thank you. Okay.
Thanks again.
Bye.
Bye.